Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for appearing. The British Columbia Gurdwaras Council and the Ontario Gurdwaras Committee have said that Canada's extradition process, as you noted, that has been in place since the late 1980s, is being used by the Indian government to, quote, stifle political dissent and silence government critics, end quotes. Do you share these concerns, and why or why not?
Mr. Chair, I have full confidence in the Canadian extradition process and related law. As members of the committee may know, I have had some experience of that with respect to Canada-China relations recently. Canada has a very high standard. The test that needs to be met, the threshold for Canada to pursue an extradition is quite high, as you know. And if anything, that has been a challenge, as was raised earlier, in bilateral relations as we work to understand legitimacy or the substance of specific extradition requests.
Thank you. One of the former foreign policy advisors to the current government has said in the Globe and Mail that the subject of Khalistani extremism came up in every single meeting with Indian officials and every talking point and every pull aside. So my question is, does the government believe that there is Khalistani terrorist financing activities going on in Canada? And if so, what is being done to address the issue?
So, Mr. Chair, I mean, aspects of the question get us into assessments that, would come to my purview in Global Affairs Canada through intelligence means and others, a subject of ongoing investigations or police work. I won't speak to the specifics. What I will say is that the premise is correct, that concerns about Khalistani extremism and transnational crime are top of mind for the Indian government. It's fair to say that we've had long-standing exchanges on this matter, and in some cases we've been able to advance those exchanges through structures. For example, we have an ongoing GAC-led Canada-India Counterterrorism Working Group. That group will be meeting again soon, and we use those platforms to address definitional differences, but also common objectives. So, for example, how India defines extremism or even terrorism does not always compute in our legal system, but there is an overlap, and that's why we have these discussions, including that working group, to address those issues.
And, the government is, closely related to the issue of terrorist financing and extremist financing is the whole issue of money laundering and beneficial ownership registries. Can you tell us what role GAC has, if at all, in the implementation of new measures to combat money laundering and terrorist financing in Canada? I'm thinking about the new federal beneficial ownership registry that's coming into place. I'm thinking about, the proposed Financial Crimes Agency of Canada, which was announced, and other measures that have been talked about and announced by the government.
So, Mr. Chair, it's a terrific question. I'll readily admit it's not my métier or my area of specialization. I do know colleagues from our legal branch are very involved, but I'm afraid I can't speak to the details of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. We now go to MP Chong. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just building on the questions I was asking earlier, the High Commissioner has said, the Indian High Commissioner to Canada has said that, quote, some Canadian citizens are using Canadian soil to launch attacks on Indian sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is against any international law, end quote. What does the Government of Canada say to that?
So, Mr. Chair, we take note of those comments, and we've heard those views expressed in diplomatic meetings repeatedly. But, for example, referring to the interview in the Globe and Mail today with the High Commissioner, he also does point out that there is a difference in the definition for example, terrorism between Canada and India. And so it's important for governments, India or otherwise, to bring forward concrete, substantiated cases and not just allegations. Canada has an elaborate and well-staffed set of teams, be it at Justice Canada, be it with the RCMP, including our liaison officers abroad and so on and so forth, to work with foreign countries to address issues of transnational crime, including terrorism, when there is evidence. In the case of our relationship with India, it has sometimes been a sticking point that we're aware they have concerns, we're ready to deal with them. I know there's a current very active caseload, as I said, for Justice Canada, and part of that gets to saying, here's what our threshold is. Can you provide evidence that meets that? For example, Justice Canada has, and the RCMP in the past, done effectively workshops with the Indian government to explain what our standards legally would be. So, you know, it's important. I mean, I understand the High Commissioner has a job to do and has his instructions. We speak about these issues regularly. We're diplomats. At the end of the day, what's really important is for his government's justice and policing agencies and institutions to work closely with ours. And I know,
you know, some people would argue that GAC is a central agency, and as such, you know, should be within the machinery of government, providing advice to other and directing other departments in terms of threats that we're facing. Like, if it is the case that Canada is being used as a staging ground to fundraise for terrorism, to fundraise for extremist activities taking place in other countries, surely GAC has a role to play in working within the machinery of government to convey that problem to the other parts of the government that are responsible for dealing with it on Canadian soil.
Mr. Chair, it's a fair point. There's an ongoing discussion between departments. GAC is part of that conversation. We don't lead on determining whether there are grounds for those accusations and how to deal with them within Canadian borders, but we certainly support, through a number of mechanisms, ongoing dialogue about how to address international crime. We have, as members may be aware, mechanisms for funding international capacity building on international crime, cross-border crime, as well as terrorism. So there's a role for
I raise
GAC.
this because it seems to me that we're becoming an increasing haven for transnational repression, in part funded by financing activities that are illicit. You know, I look at TD Bank's cancellation of a proposed takeover of a U.S. regional bank. I think a $13 billion U.S. dollar takeover bank that was kiboshed by U.S. regulators because of money laundering concerns. I see FinTrack's recent fines leveled against big Canadian banks. Royal Bank, I think, got a $7 million fine. TD got fined over $10 million. Other banks got fined all in the last month or so. And then just this past week, $65 million fine against Royal Bank's subsidiary for money laundering. Like, it seems like we are
Mr. Chong,
the
you're
nexus
well over 4 minutes.
of this
Do you
stuff.
have a question?
So that's why, yes, quite simply, former National Security Intelligence Advisor Jody Thomas recently visited India to talk about the Niger assassination. Can you tell us about that trip?
So quickly, Mr. Chair, I won't get into the details of this trip or that, but the bottom line is that Canadian senior officials, including National Security Intelligence Advisor, Deputy Minister Morrison, and others have intensively used our existing channels of diplomacy to make sure the Indian government understands the nature of our concerns, to describe the allegations that we're concerned with, and to look at ways to move forward together to get to the bottom of the matter. Thanks.